You know, child, just this morning the wind slipped through the screen door smelling of damp hickory leaves and cold porch wood, and the very first whiff sent me tumbling clear back to the autumn of '99, like a tumbleweed caught in a memory storm. Oh honey, the way a tune, a scent, or the creak of the back steps can pick the lock on an old heart. Softly and tenderly was floating from my kitchen radio, low as a lullaby, and before I knew it my hands were shaking the sugar jar the way I used to when Mama said, "Adelaida June, sprinkle kindness like you sprinkle that cinnamon." Well now, sugar, if my rambling keeps your kettle warm, why don't you kindly tap that little thumbs up right quick and leave me a note, just so I know I'm not talking to the cornfields alone. Bless your heart. Anyhow, where was I? Right, 40 crisp minutes past dawn on October 18th, 2010. These days I'm 71. Folks call me AJ, and after half a lifetime of sorting letters at the Silver Creek post office and baking my cherry peach pecan pie trio, you'd figure I'd have my piece neatly boxed and mailed. But mercy, no. There's a splinter under my skin that still throbs when the air turns sharp and the cicadas trade songs with the chimney crickets. See, every fall leaf that skitters across our gravel lane reminds me of that night in '99 when my big brother Charlie dug more than dirt beneath Mama's old Bartlett pear tree. It's been 11 years, yet my bones remember the shovel's scrape, the hush before the first clod hit her cedar coffin, the way the moonlight made the fresh mound look like a lonely bread loaf rising under a quilt of stars. Back then, our farm sat on the ragged edge of Silver Creek, Missouri, 1,500 souls, give or take, soy and corn stretching farther than Sunday promises, US 54 roaring 3 blocks off like a restless river of chrome. Our two-story clapboard house, born in 1908, still leaned into the prairie wind the way an old hymn leans on a promise. Roses once climbed the fence out back, though by '99 they'd mostly surrendered to weeds and time. Mama, Marian Ruth Harper, the quiet but iron-willed lady who collected souvenir teaspoons and crocheted hats prettier than store-bought ones, had been wrestling Parkinson's for 3 bitter years and always said she'd rather wither at home than dry out under fluorescent hospital glare. When her heart finally whispered its last on a soft October evening, Charlie insisted the undertaker's paperwork would bleed us 3, maybe 4 grand we did not have. I was too shocked to argue, jaw slack, hymn book slipping from my lap. Charlie's truck headlights blinked across the back window, and before midnight Mama lay under the pear tree with only moonbeams for company. I kept silent, shame, fear, stubborn pride, call it what you will, until the neighbors saw that raw earth, and Charlie, scared witless of jailhouse bars, pointed a shaking finger at me, swore it was my grief-struck folly, claimed I'd been spoon-feeding Mama wrong pills. That lie still echoes in my eardrums like a stalled church bell. So tonight, though my joints creak louder than the porch swing and my breath comes slow as molasses in January, I need to set this story straight, from the first crock of that shovel to the moment I found Mama's last letter, sealed in trust and truth. I reckon some tales rattle the rafters until they're told clean. This here is mine, and if you'll sit a spell, I'll lay every splinter on the table. Why does it still gnaw at me? Because there's a thin line between silence and consent, and, child, a heart can't mend while it's busy biting its own tongue. So pull your sweater close, let the crickets strike up their string section, and walk with me back to the cusp of a Missouri fall, where the sweet smell of pear blossoms once danced with the sting of betrayal, and where, Lord willing, we might yet coax a little truth to bloom. Oh, child, let me thumb back through the brittle pages of memory to a gentler chapter, back when Silver Creek smelled of sun-warmed hay bales and peppermint sticks, and the whole wide world seemed no larger than the county fair Ferris while turning lazy over the soy rows. I was 10, gangly knees, ribbon braids, a hymnal tune forever stuck between my ears, and the calendar said 1949. Though to me that was simply the newest number Mama had embroidered inside my Sunday gloves so the preacher's wife couldn't claim them for her own. Our two-story farmhouse stood proud as a hymn book left open on the prairie, its porch boards humming under bare feet, its kitchen forever breathing out cinnamon, liniment, and pipe smoke. Daddy rose before the rooster each dawn to coax the old tractor awake, while Mama, with her Park Avenue manners tucked beneath a flour dust apron, brewed chicory coffee and rattled the breakfast bell like Gabriel come calling. Charlie, being 12 and tall for his age, fancied himself master of ceremonies. He'd burst into my room crowing, "Time to greet the sun, AJ," then swipe my last biscuit before his boots hit the gravel lane toward school. After chores, we'd march down Peach Blossom Road, a red clay ribbon that stained socks the color of brick, to the single-story schoolhouse where Miss Hattie's chalk squeaked out state capitals and long division. Summer afternoons, we practiced swooping barn swallows with our arms, chased lightning bugs till our palms glowed gold, and swore we heard the corn grow if we held breath at dusk. Wednesdays meant choir rehearsal, Mama's alto gliding above the fan's slow whir. Fridays meant potluck on the church lawn, banana pudding sweating in glass bowls while farmers compared crop talk and boys jostled for slices of my cherry peach pecan pie. On Sundays, dressed in starched calico and freshly polished Mary Janes, I believed heaven sat right above the steeple, close enough for whispered promises to flutter straight into angel pockets. I dreamed simple, to bake the best pies in 3 counties, marry a man who smelled like cedar and laughed from the belly, and never drift farther than a day's ride from home. Charlie dreamed bigger, elbows propped on windowsills, plotting highways that would carry him clear to the Pacific, though he always swore he'd send postcards scented with ocean salt. In those days our telephone still shared a party line with the Garcias 2 farms over. Privacy meant stepping out to the pear tree, cupping secrets in calloused hands, and letting the cicadas swear they'd never tell. Mama's favorite saying, "Don't handle truth careless. It's hotter than a skillet," sounded like poetry then, wise yet distant, the way thunder grumbles on the horizon before you feel the rain. I stored it beside other gentle certainties, that milk delivered in glass bottles tastes like sunlight, that the postman knows every hope tucked into every envelope, and that brothers, though ornery as barn cats, don't really mean a lick of harm. Our winters brought sled races down the levee and quilts stitched from Granddaddy's work shirts. Springs brought wild violets nodding along fence posts and Mama's new crochet patterns taped to the window for extra light. Life moved in slow, dependable circles like the wheel of Daddy's pocket watch. Tick, tock, sow, reap, sing, sleep. And tucked beneath those circles beat my own shy conviction that kindness, once planted, sprouted roots deeper than disappointment. Bless my soul, how little I understood the quiet shadows hiding behind good intentions. Yet if you'd asked that barefoot girl her creed, she'd have said, "Kindness is a lantern and folks will find their way by its glow." I still guard that small flame, even on today's rocky winding road. Well now, pull your chair up close, child, because the very hinge on which this whole tale swings creaked open one blue-white afternoon in late August of '96, when the locusts were tuning their fiddles and Mama, Marian Ruth Harper with her silvering bun pin neat as a hymn, sat on the porch settling fresh lavender yarn around her fingers to start a Sunday hat. Daddy was oiling the mower beyond the clothesline, and I'd just walked over from the post office, peckish for a slice of leftover peach pie. Mama's hook danced the first tidy loop, but then, mercy, her hand twitched, subtle as a firefly wink. The hook clinked to the floorboards, the skein rolled beneath the swing, and she pressed her palm flat against her lap with a hush that made the crickets pause mid-chorus. "Just a silly flutter, AJ," she murmured, but I heard a thin quiver in her brave voice that set my heart thumping like revival drums. 2 mornings later, Dr. Rowland's letter arrived in our brass-slotted mailbox, cream envelope, stern black type, confirming what Mama already suspected yet dared not speak. Early-stage Parkinson's, prognosis steady decline, keep surroundings calm. I read that doctors scrawl right there on the gravel lane while the wind smelled of cut alfalfa, and I swear the sky changed color behind the words. It felt as though somebody had flipped the calendar ahead without asking, turning our bright squares of quilt-plaid days into moth-eaten gray. Charlie, meanwhile, was barreling home in his Freightliner after a week-long haul, pockets as empty as his diesel tank. He found me on the porch clutching the letter like a spent butterfly. "Heavens to Betsy, sis, what's got you pale as pickled eggs?" he asked, and when I told him, his freckles drained of color too, though pride kept his jaw stiff. Mama, ever the hostess, waved us inside and brewed tea as though choreographed. Spoon clink, saucer slide, smile stitched on like fine lace. She said, "Children, don't you fret. If my hands shake, I'll just crochet faster." We laughed, but our eyes skittered away from one another's like minnows avoiding noon sun. That was the spark, child, the single tremor that turned our family's gentle waltz into a slow unwinding. From that moment on, every routine carried a new rhythm. Daddy labeled pill bottles in fat marker, I started memorizing dosage charts instead of pie recipes, and Charlie, cushioned by guilt he'd never admit, began dropping by on weekends, fixing porch rails, carting groceries, and stealing long stares at Mama's trembling fingers as though he could hammer the shake straight with a 9-ounce claw. I, who once believed kindness an all-weather umbrella, suddenly noticed storm clouds no sermon had warned me about. The cost of in-home nurses, the tightrope of dignity versus dependence, and the way brothers sometimes swallow fear until it bubbles out as reckless decisions. Still, inside that first shock bloomed a pocket of determination. I felt it thawed in my chest. A stubborn vow whispered on repeat, "Mama will stay here, under her own roof and her own rose-print curtains, come high water or icy wind." I couldn't explain then why my pulse quickened each time the kettle whistled, or why I hoarded every teaspoon of normalcy like sugar stamps in wartime, only that the ground beneath the pear tree, once just dirt, now looked like holy promise, a place we'd stand guard over love itself. That afternoon, as cicadas revved and Daddy shut the toolbox with a clang, our lives hit a hidden switch. The future leaned in, solemn and unblinking, and I felt, with a certainty that scared me sweet, that nothing, no hin, no harvest, no soft handshake of daylight, would ever spin quite the same again. Oh, child, autumn slid in early that year. September '99 wore the hush of brittle corn husks and unfinished prayers, and from the first chilly dawn I sensed the steady gears of our daily life losing their click-click rhythm. Mama's hands, once nimble enough to not lace trim in the time it took Charlie to slurp a mug of coffee, now trembled so fierce her teacup rattled like sleigh bells against the saucer. And the doctor's prescriptions stacked up on the kitchen windowsill like stern little soldiers daring us to question orders. Every new pill spoke another cost. The tractor needed a clutch, the roof begged new shingles, but the pharmacy's cash register told louder than church bells. Charlie stomped through the back door one Saturday, past due notices fanned out like a gambler's losing hand, muttering that freight contracts were drying up and folks in St. Louis still owed him 3 weeks' pay. "AJ, we can't keep feeding coins into this bottomless wishing well," he hissed, eyes red-rimmed from nights he claimed to spend revving hope on the interstate, but I reckon we're spent bending over ledgers that refuse to balance. His worry boiled over as anger, at doctors, at gasoline prices, at me for singing hymns while sautéing onions, as if music alone could zip that hole in our bucket. I swallowed back a tart reply. Good daughters, I told myself, do not stir the stew of family shame in public. Yet inside, my own nerves snapped like twigs under frost, fear of losing Mama to a sterile nursing ward, fear the bank might snatch the farmhouse from beneath our rocking chairs, fear that charity whispers at church potlucks would brand as pitiful. At the same time the town began its slow-motion sidestep around our misfortune, Mrs. Davenport from the quilting circle, who once borrowed my nutmeg grater every Thanksgiving, started speaking in weather reports instead of full sentences, and Pastor Eli, bless him, delivered pies and prayers to the porch, but never stayed long enough to taste either. Only young Ben, my late sister's boy, fresh home from Navy service, kept showing up with a grin, hammering loose porch boards, pretending not to notice the tension sparking like static between his mama's kin. One chilled Wednesday afternoon, during Mama's worse-than-usual tremor spell, the visiting nurse, kind woman named Darla, suggested a hospital bed and professional lift by month's end. Her advice landed like a cinder block on Charlie's foot. He exploded that we didn't need outsiders strutting through, airing our linens and charging per minute. Darla gathered her chart and slipped out, kindness in her eyes, but I caught the undertow of town gossip swirling behind her heels. That night, after tucking quilts around Mama, I stood alone at the kitchen sink, scalding water running over plates already clean, and for the first time in my polite life, I pressed my forehead to the cabinet door and let out one sharp, hidden sob, the kind you bury quick before anyone hears. Shame piled on top of grief. Shame that I questioned my brother's judgment. Shame that I couldn't magic money from pie crust. Shame that my faith felt threadbare where I needed armor. Yet a kernel of fight popped hot in my chest. Mama's whispered, "Better to wither at home," looped through my thoughts like a Bannister hymn, and I resolved quietly, stubbornly, that no collection of overdue slips or small-town whispers would bulldoze her wish. Still, by the time frost dusted the soy field silver, our house bristled with unspoken arguments, Charlie calculating funeral prices he'd never admit aloud, me memorizing Medicaid forms after midnight, both of us orbiting Mama's recliner like wary planets. Something had to give. We could feel it in the way the porch swing groaned under new weight, in the silence between spoon clinks, in the quiver of hope that refused, so far, to collapse. Yet I couldn't shake the dread that the next knock at the door, literal or figurative, would splinter what little normalcy we still clasped. And mercy, child, I had no inkling how true that would be once the first hard leaf finally fell. Child, the night the world tipped off its axis came sudden as a snapped guitar string, October 17th, 1999. Moon frail and thin as a thumbnail over Silver Creek, furnace clicking on for the first time that season. Mama propped in her easy chair humming Blessed Assurance under her breath while I folded linens still warm from the dryer. Then her song fell silent, her eyelids fluttered, and in the hush between one heartbeat and the next I felt time wobble, freeze, and rearrange itself forever. I knelt, fingers searching her wrist for that dear, stubborn pulse, but the clock on the mantel seemed to hold its breath with me, and when its second hand finally twitched again I knew Mama had slipped past where ticking matters. A sound like distant glass shattering echoed in my ears, my own gasp, I reckon, and grief rose in a wave so fierce I tasted copper on my tongue. Charlie burst in from the mudroom, boots muddy, overdue bills clenched in his fist, and before my tears could shape words he saw her stillness and dropped his knees, calling Mama, "Don't you dare," as if scolding a child. We sat, tangled in shock, until the house groaned in the wind. Then Charlie's gaze sharpened, flitting to the telephone, to the mantel clock, to the stack of hospital invoices on the table, and I swear I saw a door slam shut behind his eyes. "AJ, funerals cost a fortune we ain't got," he whispered, voice stripped raw, and Mama always said she wanted to stay home. I, numb and foolish, merely nodded. Sorrow had glued my thoughts together. Charlie's next words, "I'll handle it, you go brew coffee," barely registered. I drifted to the kitchen like a ghost, praying, measuring grounds, fighting the urge to scream. Behind me, the back door squealed, a shovel clanged, gravel crunched under hurried steps toward the pear tree. By the time caffeine steamed in our chipped mugs, moonlight painted the yard bone white, and a fresh mound of earth, tidy, obscene, rose where summer's iris patch once grew. Child, my breath hitched so hard my ribs hurt. "Charlie, what have you done?" I managed, voice quivering like violin strings. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Kept the family together," he said, and something fragile in me splintered. I wanted to rage, to call the sheriff, yet love and shame tangled like briars. Mama resting under her own sky, yes, but buried in secret, no prayer, no hymn, no community hands bearing casseroles and condolences. I pressed my palm to the cold window, tears fobbing the pain, and realized I'd lost more than a mother. I'd lost the straight line I'd always drawn between right and wrong. Dawn seeped over the fields pink as an old bruise, and with it arrived our first neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, basket of biscuits balanced on her hip, eyes catching that raw earth before I could spin a story. By supper the whole township buzzed like hornets. Charlie, cornered by his own haste, squeezed my shoulder hard enough to bruise and hissed, "If the law comes, you tell 'em it was your notion. Say grief made you batty." My stomach plunged. The brother who once raced lightning bugs with me now asked me to shoulder a sin that wasn't mine. In that instant I felt the floor tilt. Love curdled into betrayal. Sorrow sparked into simmering fury, and fear, thick, metallic fear, settled in my mouth. I'd always believed kindness the sturdiest bridge between souls, but standing in that kitchen with Mama's scent still curling through the air and fresh soil under my brother's fingernails, I understood a harsher truth. Sometimes the bridge burns, and the only light left is the fire itself. Oh, mercy, those first days after we laid Mama beneath the pear tree felt like the whole wide world turned its pockets inside out and spilled every sound it ever owned. Then, just as sudden, someone snapped the radio dial to silent and left me alone with the tick of my own pulse. The phone quit ringing, folks in Silver Creek acted as if grief were contagious, and the post office let me take all the time you need, though no one said who would sort the postcards of other people's lives while I tried to scrape meaning off my own cracked plate. Dawn still smeared honey gold across the soybean stubble, but it no longer called me outdoors. I'd sit at the kitchen table, hands folded like a schoolgirl punished for whispering, listening to the hot water pipes sigh through the walls and wondering how long a heart could echo before it emptied itself clean. Charlie stomped around in half-hour bursts, claiming he had errands in town, but his eyes skittered away from mine, and he spoke in those curt, splintery syllables menus when they're scared the truth might leak out if they linger. One morning, week 2, maybe 3, time had quit wearing labels. I opened Mama's cedar chest hunting for the lavender shawl she loved on cold evenings. Instead, my fingers brushed a flat envelope wedged beneath her stack of crochet patterns. Paper crackled like dry leaves when I drew it free. And child, I swear the air shifted, gentle but sure, the way creek water smooths a stone. The seal was unbroken. My name, AJ, sat on the front in Mama's steady, no-nonsense hand. I hesitated, throat tight as new shoes, then slid my thumb beneath the flap and unfolded the letter. Her words came soft as a lullaby yet stern as a church elder. "If I pass at home, Charlie, you call Reverend Jones and Sheriff Sparks, and you treat my body honest. Adelaide June, take courage, the truth is hot, but it won't scorch a pure heart." There it was, proof Mama never meant secrecy, proof Charlie's midnight digging wasn't some last wish, but a shortcut born of panic and pride. I read the lines twice, 3 times, tears puddling where her pen had paused, and a hollow I hadn't even known I carried filled with something like steady light, ache, and relief braided together. For the first time since the clock stalled over her chair, I inhaled without tasting rust. Yet even with that letter folded against my chest like a second heartbeat, the house stayed hushed, plates went mostly unwashed, and I caught myself apologizing to empty rooms for noises I hadn't made. My faith, once a bright patchwork quilt, looked threadbare in places. I still believed heaven listened, but I wasn't sure whose voice it followed when family prayers contradicted each other. I took to humming softly and tenderly at half volume, letting the notes drift through hallways like moths seeking lamplight, hoping Mama could still hear the alto line she'd taught me. Nights were the hardest. Wind rattled the loose attic vent, and every creak sounded like a shovel hitting stone. I'd lie awake rehearsing what I'd tell the sheriff, whether kindness and justice could sit side by side at the same table, whether exposing Charlie's lie would tear whatever tattered threads still held us kin. In that quiet, I lost the girl who believed problems could be patched with pie and patience. In her place stood a woman stunned by the cost of silence, yet unsure where courage began. Still, the letter warmed my pocket like a coal cupped in winter palms, reminding me there was a path, narrow, uphill, lit by candle truth, waiting to be walked. And though loneliness nested in my ribs, I caught glimmers of resolve flickering just behind it, faint as the first firefly of June yet stubborn enough to promise. The story wasn't over. Not for Mama, not for me, and not for the pear tree rooted in restless soil. Well now, butter my biscuit and call me hopeful, because the very first breeze of January 2000 slipped through the cracked kitchen window smelling of chimney smoke and clean snow, and, wouldn't you know, it carried a knock on the screen door that rattled my nerves awake. There stood my nephew Ben, fresh from a night shift at the feed mill, uniform jacket dusted with oat holes, holding a shoebox wrapped in yesterday's Gazette, eyes shining the way Mama's did whenever she nailed a perfect crochet stitch, and before I could ask a blessed thing he eased inside, set that box on the table, and said, "And AJ, I figured your pantry could use a spark." He peeled back the newsprint to reveal 6-pint jars of crimson tomatoes he'd canned on leave, a bundle of marigold seeds saved from the churchyard, and, tucked beneath, a battered Polaroid of Mama smiling under the pear tree last spring, her hands steady in that frozen moment, sunlight catching every silver strand. Child, my breath hitched. The house, hushed for weeks, suddenly felt like it had lungs again. Ben poured 2 cups of chicory and listened, really listened, as I haltingly unwrapped the story I'd been guarding like a live coal, the midnight burial, Charlie's lies, the hush-hush fear that shackled my tongue. When I slid Mama's sealed letter across the table, Ben traced the notary stamp with his callous thumb and whispered, "Truth don't spoil in daylight, ma'am." Those words settled in my chest warmer than any quilt. He offered no grand plan, just a steady presence, but it was enough to tilt the scales inside me. I realized courage doesn't always crash in like thunder. Sometimes it pads up soft as snow boots at dawn. We spent the afternoon labeling soup cans for the food drive, and each hum of the marker felt like a heartbeat returning to proper rhythm. By dusk, when we carried the pantry box to his pickup, lilac twilight pulled over the soybean stubble, and I noticed, for the first time since October, that the sky still knew how to blush. Back inside, I tucked Mama's letter into the pocket of my cardigan, not hidden away this time, but ready, like a lantern trimmed and waiting for a match. As I stood at the sink rinsing Kenning lids, the porch light flickered against frosted glass, and I caught my reflection, eyes tired, yes, but no longer vacant, lips set not in resignation, but in quiet resolve. A thought budded small as those marigold seeds, yet mighty in its insistence, that maybe justice and kindness could be kin after all, and that honoring Mama meant telling the whole story, sheriff's badge and all, no matter whose pride blistered. Sleep came easier that night. The attic vents still rattled, the wind still prowled, yet I felt cradled by something sturdier than fear. And when dawn painted the kitchen walls peach gold, I buttoned my coat, slipped the letter into my bag, and whispered to the empty chair, "All right, Mama, let's take the long road toward daylight." Ooh-wee, child. It wasn't a trumpet blast or a lightning flash, just a nephew's steady faith, a handful of seeds, and a snapshot of better days, yet it nudged my weary heart back onto its feet, pointed it toward a horizon where truth might bloom like marigolds in July. Oh, oi, child, the mercy I felt that raw February dawn still warms these old bones, because right there, standing between Mama's cedar chest and the frost-clouded window, I finally quit bartering with silence and chose to swing the door wide open on every hidden corner of my heart. I smoothed Mama's notarized letter flat on the table, pressed my shaky palm atop her ink, and whispered, "Enough, hush, Marianne. We're walking this truth to daylight." My cheeks burned with December's worth of swallowed sorrow, yet a hush of steady courage welled up stronger than the tremor in my voice, and I understood, sure as sunrise, that carrying someone else's lie is like hauling water in a split bucket. No matter how careful you step, the cold will soak clear through. So I buttoned my best winter coat, the gray wool Mama hemmed for choir trips, pinned her silver teaspoon brooch at the collar for luck, tucked that letter in my pocket where my pulse could keep watch, and stepped onto the porch as if the gravel lane were a church aisle waiting for confession. The sky was pewter, the wind sharp as honesty, but every breath tasted sweeter than all the silent days behind me. With each crunch of ice beneath my boots, I felt lighter, not because grief had shrunk, but because I'd quit folding it small and hiding it under. Maybe tomorrow. At the sheriff's office, I laid the envelope on Hank Sparks's desk, voice quavering yet clear. "Sheriff, this is Mama's last word, and mine is that I won't stay quiet another minute." Hank's eyebrows rose like curtain cords, but he read, nodded slow, poured me coffee, and said, "AJ, you done the right thing, and right may hurt, but it heals too." "Child," I cried into that styrofoam cup, big, unpretty tears that tasted of relief and salt, and with every drop I felt the tight ring round my lungs loosen. By supper time, Charlie sat in a holding room answering hard questions, and I drove home steady, heart thumping but unburdened. I did not gloat, I did not crumble, I simply breathed, because truth had finally taken its rightful seat at Mama's kitchen table. That night I carried a lantern to the pear tree, knelt on thawing earth, and planted Ben's marigold seeds in a ring around the mound, tiny sparks of orange hope I promised would bloom come summer. Then I laid my shame beside them, covered both with loam, and whispered, "Grow what you will, but let lies stay buried." Inside, I folded the gray coat, spoon pin and all, into the cedar chest, closed the lid gentle, and felt the hush in the house turn from haunted to holy, as if Mama were humming approval through the floorboards. Child, I did not erase the hurt, nor pretend Charlie's betrayal was a pebble easily kicked aside. Yet I claimed my own tomorrow. I returned to the post office, humming psalms between stamp stacks. I baked a fresh cherry peach pecan trio and carried slices to neighbors who tiptoed around my grief. And I told each bite, each handshake, we begin again. In choosing daylight, I lost the illusion that kindness alone keeps wolves at bay, but I gained a sturdier truth. Kindness braided to courage can light even the darkest back porch. That is the vow I stitched into my marrow, no more living half-lit. I'm walking forward, sugar, not away from pain but through it, head high, pockets honest, heart wide enough to shelter both sorrow and sunrise, and that, Lord willing, is living indeed. Well now, sugar, let me take one last long breath and tell you the moment I finally laid my burden down. Second Sunday of March, 2000, frost still nipping dogwood buds, choir robes smelling of starch and cedar. I'd just tucked Mama's tea-rose handkerchief into my purse and felt its softness remind me how gentleness must sometimes do the heavy lifting. After service, I walked the gravel path behind the church alone, shoes crunching like breaking vows, and I could almost hear Mama's alto humming along the fence line. Right there by the iron gate, truth rose up so loud inside my chest I thought everyone would see it pulsing through my coat, so I stopped pretending. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the little glass vial of morphine Charlie had planted months earlier to frame me, and stared at it until the liquid caught the sun like tarnished honey. That bottle had been my silent jailer, proof of his lies and, worse, proof of my own fear to name them. My hand shook, mercy, it shook, but I uncorked the cap, poured every last drop into the red Missouri dirt, and mashed the empty glass flat beneath my heel until shards glittered like dull stars. In that grind of heel against earth, I tasted a hard freedom. The past happened, yes, yet it would not dictate the beat of my tomorrow. I whispered, Mama, I choose light and the wind, honest witness, carried the words over the soy fields. Then I fished out the folded page I'd been writing nights by the stove, my confession and my promise all at once. I admitted how long I'd let shame hush my voice, how many times I'd rehearsed forgiveness, but never said it aloud. How I finally understood that forgiving Charlie did not mean excusing him, only refusing to let his shadows stretch across my own sunrise. I signed it with my full name, Adelaide June Harper, pressed the ink dry with that rose handkerchief, and tucked the letter beneath the church's cornerstone, leaving it there like a mustard seed of truth for whatever soul might need proof that courage can bloom late yet still bloom bright. Walking home, I felt years peel off my shoulders, felt spring's sunlight slip through the porch lattice like fresh hope, felt my lungs inflate with a clean song I hadn't sung since before the shovel scraped midnight clay. That evening I baked 2 pies, one for Ben, one for the widowed Mrs. Caldwell who'd kept a wary distance since the rumors, because choosing life, I decided, meant feeding it. I set an extra place at my own table, not for Charlie's ghost, but for tomorrow's possibilities. New hymns to learn, roses to replant around the pear tree, grandchildren yet to hear how truth sounds when spoken plain. And when moonlight painted silver across the fresh sprouting marigold ring, I leaned on the rail and told the quiet yard, I am not broken china, I'm kiln-fired clay, remade each time the flame licks close. Child, from that night forward I quit measuring days by what I'd lost and started weighing them by what I could still offer, one warm slice of pie, one steady alto line, one honest word at a time. I chose to live on, no grudges clanging, no regrets nipping at my heels, just onward, steady as a hymn's last amen, and if my voice trembles telling it, that's only the sound of healing setting its roots. Well, child, when I sit here on this creaking porch in 2010, steam curling from my teacup while dusk paints the soy stubble pale gold, I see 2 silver creeks laid side by side like quilt squares, one before that October night of '99, and one after, and the seam between them teaches me more than any preacher ever could. Back then I believed goodness worked like a tally mark. You stacked enough pies baked, hymns sung, letters delivered, and life paid you back in sunny days. But Mama's hush-proud burial and Charlie's trembling lie proved the ledger is messier, full of scribbles and crossed-out sums. So I learned to trade accounting for gardening, plant truth deep, water it with courage, and trust it'll push up green even through hardpan. I learned that silence can masquerade as kindness, but it's really just fear in its Sunday gloves. Speak, even if your voice quavers like a barn door in wind, for words held too long sour like milk. I learned forgiveness isn't rolling over mercy, no, it's setting broken bones so they mend straight. You still feel the ache on rainy mornings, but you walk without limping. I learned family isn't a guarantee, it's a choice renewed like bread starter, feed it honesty or watch it turn sour. And most of all I learned that grief and joy are neighboring notes in the same hymn. When you give sorrow room to breathe, it harmonizes instead of hollering. These days I wake grateful the pear tree still blossoms, that marigolds ring its roots bright as pennies, and that my brother, 5 years older, 2 states away, writes me a monthly letter in which he signs, trying to do better. I keep everyone, not because the past is erased, but because it's redeemed inch by inch, like a barn painted between spring storms. Now, sugar, maybe you're holding your own cracked bucket, an old regret, a secret fear, a long-stalled dream, and waiting for the perfect forecast before you pour it out. Let an old mail clerk tell you, skies rarely clear all at once and time is stingier than we think. Maybe it's time you stopped waiting for permission, uncapped the bottle and planted your truth in whatever soil you've got. It might sprout crooked, it might bloom late, but bloom it will if you tend it steady. And if this tale of a tremoring mother, a desperate son, and a stubborn daughter has plucked even one string in your heart, go on and let me know down in the comments. Tell me the seed you've been meaning to sow, so we can cheer its first green shoot together. Well now, sweet pea, I've poured out my whole pitcher of memories and set it here on the porch rail for you to sip, warm or cold as you like. And I reckon if you stayed with me this far you can feel the night air of Silver Creek curling around your ankles, just the way it does mine. The cicadas are revving up their summer choir, the old pear tree is rustling like pages in a well-loved Bible, and somewhere in that dark hush I think Mama is still humming softly and tenderly, inviting every wayfaring soul to step a little closer to the light. I've told you how grief can twist a family vine, how a lie can choke the sweetest blossom, and how truth, though it scorches when you first touch it, can set down roots stronger than any secret. But listen close. This story isn't stitched only in autumns gone by. It's alive tonight, beating steady in the ribs of an old woman and reaching, branches wide, toward whoever might need a bit of shade. Maybe that whoever is you. Maybe you're holding a hurt that whistles through your sleep, or loving someone who's forgotten the map back home, or balancing a truth so heavy you can't decide whether to carry it or let it fall. Child, I can't tell you which road to choose, but I can tell you the lantern is already in your hand. The flame may flicker thin, it may smoke and sputter, yet it will glow just the same once you cup it close and breathe on it gentle. And let me whisper something else, the part my 71-year-old bones have finally understood. Time doesn't erase love or pain, it weaves them together until the cloth can keep you warm. What once felt jagged now lines the quilt, and if you run your fingers across the seam you'll find it softer than you feared. Some evenings I sit here and swear I catch a whiff of cedar sweet pipe smoke and hear footsteps crunch the gravel drive. For half a heartbeat I imagine Charlie coming through the gate, shoulders squared, carrying an honest apology in both palms. It hasn't happened yet, but mercy, the porch light stays on. Because forgiveness, true forgiveness, isn't a door you slam once, it's a gate you leave unlatched, just in case somebody decides to remember the way back. And sometimes, child, I think he just might. So before you click off and let the next bit of the internet whirl you away, lean in and tell me, what truth have you been saving for later? Is it worth the wait? Or is today the day you set it down and step into a room washed clean with morning? Drop your thoughts down below so this old heart knows it's beating in good company. After all, a story only finds its full blessing once it shakes another story loose. And one more question I can't keep from asking because it keeps my own lantern lit. Do you believe love, the genuine, bone-deep kind, is destined to circle back no matter how far it strays? I'll be right here listening to the swing creak and the marigolds rustle, waiting to hear what your spirit says.